When returning objects to the front end, we need to be pretty specific about what we are returning. There are some rules that we try to follow in Glee, and one of those is that we should never return more to the front end than is necessary. Another rule is that we should never return an entity to the front end, and I'll explain some of the reasons for that. I'll start with the entity. In Entity Framework and other ORMs like it, there is this concept of lazy loading, and you can actually apply this rule to anything that has lazy loading. Really, it's just that lazy loading is more common in ORMs. So lazy loading is where you have pulled out an employee, for instance, from the database, and you want to get a list of their certifications. So you pull you tell the ORM to give you the employee, you get the employee. Now you're going to do employee dot certifications. Up until this moment, the certifications query has not run if lazy loading is turned on. The ORM has only given you the data to populate the properties on the entity, the base entity, not its children, its child properties, like a list of certifications, or a list of anything else, or a complex object of anything else. Like say you've got an address object that is in a separate table in the database. If you get the employee with lazy loading enabled, then it doesn't actually populate that address object or the list of certifications until you actually ask for it. So when you do employee.address, at that moment, the ORM will send out another select statement and populate that sub object, or that sub. If you do employee.certifications, then it will go ahead and do a select on the database to get all of the certifications that apply to that employee. It's called lazy loading, and it's really cool, and it's really useful, and it cuts down on a lot of includes and trying to force Entity Framework to get all of the data all in one select. It can also it can also become really chatty for the SQL server, so that may become a problem. You need to look at that, but that's a topic for another discussion. So for today, we're just talking about mapping and returning objects to the client. So if you return an entity with lazy loading to the client, what the client will receive is all of the base properties populated with nulls for any of the child properties, like any kind of complex objects or any lists or IEnumerables of things. They will just return as null. So that's not good. The other rule is that you should return only what is necessary to the client. That is true in the case of a query that is supposed to populate a drop-down list. You don't need an entire object with 20 different properties to populate a drop-down. And honestly, if you return all 20 properties just to populate the drop-down, you're probably going to be slowing down the rendering of that drop-down drastically, because you have to wait for the entire payload of all those 20 properties to make it up to the client, and then they can parse it and pull out the two properties that they really need. So that should be done in the back end. It's much more efficient in the back end, and we can do some. We can apply some rules here and make sure that this is super efficient for the front end, and we're not providing too much. Another reason why you might not want to provide an entire entity or an entire object with everything is because of security concerns. Maybe there's something secret on that entity, or maybe there's something secret on that larger object that's not really necessary for this specific query, this specific request. And so the idea is really just to send just enough to the front end, and not any more than that. So let's take a look at this in action. And we're also going to look at the configuration, and then we're going to look at a little bit of a refactor so that we can understand how to do that, because this is something that you may have to do quite a bit. So, so here in this method, we are getting one employee. We go and get it from the database, and then we're going to map that uh, right here, and then we're going to return the response. So you see this syntax right here, this underscore mapper map. This is the syntax that we use for AutoMapper, which is the mapping tool that we use day to day in the .NET backend. So you can see here it's we're giving it the employee type as the source type. We've got the type that we're targeting, which is the employee response, and then we pass in our employee entity so that AutoMapper can do its magic and can read the properties off of the employee and then populate this employee response. So let's take a look at the employee response really quick. This is what we call a POCO. It's a plain old C# object. And there's really nothing special about this that's going on. You can see that it has public getters and setters. Normally we don't like public setters on anything, but this is a simple DTO. It has a very short lifespan, and having a public setter on this is actually something that is helpful with the mapping. So it's just a property bag. We don't care too much about it, but it does have all default values on all the properties, because if we don't have default values on non-nullables, then the compiler will complain to us. Now we could leave this one as nullable, and then we could remove the default value at that point. But that's not always necessary with one of these, because we can always just leave them as blank strings. All right, so that's the employee response. So this is going to map the properties from the employee entity over to our employee response, and then we can return that response to the client. Another example here is in this method where we are getting the client is asking for a list or an array of employees, and so we're going to give them an array of employee responses. So after we've done all of the logic that queries the entities, pages them, sorts them, whatever it's doing there, now we have paged, which is the paged list of employees. And you see here, like up here, that we were passing in one type, employee to employee response. Here we're doing IEnumerable employee to IEnumerable employee response. So you can not only can you map single objects, but you can map entire lists of objects, which is really helpful. Cuts down on some code there. And then we just return that mapped response. Very handy, very cool. So let's take a look at how this is being configured. Here in infrastructure and bootstrapping, and then we have here AutoMapper Bootstrapper. So let's take a look. So here we can see that in this configuration file we are configuring the mapping for any of the objects that we want to map, and then we create the mapper, and then we are using dependency injection in Glee. So this is going to basically register our mapper as a singleton with the IOC container of ASP.NET Core. So then here is where we are actually configuring. We're telling AutoMapper, hey, it's okay to map employees and employee responses. If this did not exist, and we tried to map an employee to an employee response, AutoMapper would actually throw an exception at that point. So anytime you are going to map a new type, you need to come here and add that type. So basically register it here. So I told you we were going to refactor something. I did notice something that I thought would maybe be better if we could add a new type, because that list, the list of employees, those lists almost never need all the properties. So let's imagine that this is going to be the client is going to be populating a drop down with our get all employees. So, and you could, if you need, you may have to have another endpoint that's specialized for just drop downs and things like that, and that's okay too. But let's just imagine that that's what we're doing here. And so for that, all we need is an ID and a name. If you've worked in Glee at any for any length of time, you already understand that employee doesn't have a name property. It has a first name, a last name, middle name, second name. It has a display name, but it doesn't have a name property on it. So what do we do when the properties in both types don't just match completely? You know, we've got on this on this type we've got a property that is it has it's not really how do you say that? It doesn't match any property in the employee entity. Can AutoMapper do that automatically? And the answer is no, at least not today yet. So we need to tell AutoMapper how to handle that. Otherwise, name will just be null every time. So let's go here to the configuration, and we're going to say for member, and then we're just going to use a little bit of link to tell it which property to choose off of the requester. And then we're going to basically tell it how to map this. And you can see there's plenty of options in here. You can do null substitute. You can allow a null. You can do many things. Convert using, which convert using is very cool because you can set like value resolvers and things like that. That's not something that I'm going to try to cover in this video. You can go to just Google AutoMapper, and you'll find a mountain of documentation. AutoMapper's been around for quite a while, so there's plenty of mature documentation. We're going to use map from, and map from can take several things. I can put in a value resolver, or I can just use an expression or a function. So that's actually what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to use a function. So I'm going to say string join x first name, no, x display name, and then x last name. So that it takes the display name and the last name and it concatenates them. Let's see. I wonder if it'll give me a, yeah, separator is what I wanted, so we'll do a space. Oh, and I need a comma there. Okay, so that is how to set up a custom mapping for a property. Let's see if I can get this all on one screen so you can see what's going on there. I have my base create map, which is what you have to have anyway. Then if you've got a property that doesn't quite match up, you can do for member, tell it which property you want to map to, and then you can do this kind of syntax using the option, the member option, and basically set up your own custom mapping, which is pretty cool. So so here I imagine over the course of your project this list could get longer. There are some other ways that you can cut down on the code and maybe even reuse some code. You can set up value converters, value transformers, profiles, things like that, and all of that can be found in the documentation for AutoMapper. But for now, this should get you moving with AutoMapper at the basic level.